Hi everyone, this is Arpad from the YouTube channel Star Path Academy, and today I would like to answer some questions posted by members on buymeacoffee.com. And the question goes, Hi, I have a question for you, Arpad. On June 30th, 2021, you posted a YouTube video and outlined the steps or waves of price increases during high inflation. Here in the US, we have already experienced price spikes in many raw materials, which was followed by a price spike in housing. According to your experience in Romania, the next wave of inflation should be in food, which coincidentally appears to be well on the way. A food shortage is almost assumed in the major news outlets at this point. My question is, the raw material price spike has been blamed on the supply chain crisis, and the housing shortage and the price spike has been blamed on the reopening of the economy. As many people sought housing at the same time, the food shortage and the price increases that have not even happened yet are already being blamed on the war in Europe. There seems to be a pretty good reason or excuse for all the price increases waves. Was there always a good excuse for these waves in Romania? Or are some of your price increases here in the US actually caused by legitimate issues? Thank you, Arpad, and keep posting those videos. Well, thank you very much for being a member, and thank you very much for the coffees, and thank you very much for your question. So, in fact, I did post a video, I believe it was the waves of how to ride the waves of hyperinflation. I will have a link to the full video in the description, but I believe I also made a clip of exactly what you were saying, where I talk about those things, and even chart like a handcrafted graph in order to explain my reasoning and my observations during the Romanian high inflationary period of the 90s that we experienced, and what we kind of assumed after a while, or what we learned from it. And indeed, one of the last waves is food inflation, the price of food inflating. So that is not the last wave, but that's the last thing in the series of waves, right? And then it starts all over again and all over again. And it does travel in waves. And then usually the second wave of house increases happens, a house price increase happens after the first wave of wage inflation. And it's kind of hard to believe, but eventually, in order to truly be an inflationary situation, not a stagflationary situation, wages will have to increase, right? Either the minimum wage will have to be increased, or something will have to give in order for not to have a complete economic shutdown, which most of the guiders of the economy don't want, at least not immediately, right? So it will happen. However, that can take many forms. And just to say, one form could be government issued checks, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that your wage will increase, but either your tax might decrease, or it could be government issued checks, which would have been hard for you to believe before 2019, I guess. But now it's fairly common to think about that. So we had that in Romania as well. And checks issued for families with children, checks issued for specific workers, specific fields of work, and so on and so forth. And if they're smart, the powers that be usually also play this so that the people have some kind of animosity against other groups of people. So the anger during these times is directed against each other and not upwards towards the leaders of the economy, so to speak. So when food increase happens, usually that can increase to a breaking point, and what happens after that breaking point, we'll see. Most likely, if you remember in that chart, one of the last things that has to increase is salaries. But as I said, it doesn't always be. It could be an increase. It could be a decrease in taxes, government issued checks, subsidies on food. It could be just subsidies on food, or let's say no more tax on food or something like that. So basically the distance between the food price and the salary or the cost of the food that you have to pay at the grocery store has to decrease, right? In order to elongate this period so the nation can be robbed as much as possible by the oligarchs. So that was happening in Romania as well. And that is quite common in these situations. So it's just to elongate the process, right? So it gives more time. And then again, the waves start with raw materials, housing, so on and so forth down the line, eventually food, and then another step in salaries. At that point, the second wave is going to be harder, but we're not in the second wave yet. So right now, actually a decrease has to happen, right? And especially raw materials, which kind of already materialized, if you want to put it that way. So, and to answer your question, yes, there's always going to be some kind of excuse, right? And it's always going to be somewhat even legitimate. So the best lie is some type of lie where there's some truth to it, right? It's very hard to pass a lie that is a 100% full lie, right? Even for the best of media outlets, it has to have some truth so that your peers have to provide kind of the context of that. Okay, well, in this context, that lie is actually true somewhat, right? So it has to be dubious. It has to be in the fog, right? And those are the best ways. And now we had two different stages, right? Where it was prior 89 and prior the revolution, and which was communism. There it was very top down, where it was specifically told, well, the crops are not good because of X, and it usually some Western powers influence, and it could have been true, right? To some degree, it was true, right? However, Romania wasn't this, even during communism, it wasn't like one of the hated communist countries. There was actually American presidents that visited Romania, even under the rule of Ceausescu. So, but they had to have this kind of facade of, yes, they hate us because we're so efficient, and so on and so forth. And there's punishments and international powers trying to take over. And that's why we cannot have so much stuff. Or in other cases, we are paying our debt off, and so on and so forth, which was almost always true to some degree. It has to be true to some degree, right? So the lies were very different at the periods during communism. And then after the revolution, the lies were a bit different. Where, well, we have lost so much during communism that is the price that we have to pay for the next 10 years, that the the quality of the life has to be so bad currently in Romania compared to our neighbors, or compared to our Western neighbors. Whereas in fact, now the new oligarchy was plundering Romania, right? The one that was forming in the 90s. And no, we didn't. Romania during communism had a lot of industry built up. Yes, technically speaking, it was older equipment, and it was built for a different era, but it was there. It was still functioning, right? Well, all of that had to be gutted out in order to make the country poor first, so it can provide cheap labor force for the rest of Europe and so on. So I don't want to go necessarily into the politics. However, I want to say that the lies were a bit different, whereas the lies were that, oh, these old communists, right, plunder the country, whereas in some cases, actually, life was, even towards the end of communism, might have been, at least for some people, better than during the hyperinflationary phase. Now, monetarily speaking, of course, regarding freedoms and the human spirit, that may have not been true. So I'm saying that there's excuses and types of excuses, and it's always has to fit into the context, and it's going to be always somewhat true, or it might feel somewhat true. But my family and I kind of had this concept of never taking any explanation for granted, as long as it doesn't really make sense for us, or we cannot get to the bottom of it, or actually get it to a level where we understand it, right? Because many of these explanations are vague and opaque and in the sky somewhere. Well, it's just these big numbers or these big words that people are always regurgitating, that they heard it from a news, or they heard it from a website, or now I guess today's or so even social media websites. But as long as it doesn't feel right, or doesn't, you don't understand it, or there's some other opinions, we wanted to hear all of the opinions and believe none, basically. And we wanted to get to the bottom of it. So that was a bit different in my family, that we were kind of raised that way from a very early age. So just like engineers, right? You want to make sure that you understand the very basic concept of what is causing it. So in these cases, as you said, the explanation of raw materials and, the house price increase and so on, it makes sense, but they never talk, that's only the last step before the price increase, right? What made it, let's say just for the producers, what made it worthwhile for the producers to hold on to the products and not sell it, right? That creates the shortage. The economic situation dictates, the pricing structure dictates that it's better to hold on to something than sell it. Why? Because the economic machine was messed with. Where it was messed with, we don't talk about that. We just talk about the very last step that happens right before the price increase. Right, in current context. Oh, okay, there's price increases because of shortage, because the producers are holding back. Well, why are they holding back? Why are they incentivized to do that? Why this? Why this? And then you have to look at it holistically. And then you will find a cause, right? The butterfly that caused the butterfly effect, right? And usually it has to do with something monetary, and it has to do something politically, right? So that is the curtain that they don't want you to look behind, right? So that always is the case, right? It's just control and power. And eventually it trickles down, or trickles up in this case, to the whole of the economy, and then people suffer, right? So it has to be somewhat believable. Or if not, then your propaganda minister needs to be fired and a new one needs to be hired. So there will always be excuses. Actually, human nature is sort of like that they act emotionally. Many people do act, and even us, we're not like pointing fingers here. Many of us act emotionally, and then afterwards we rationalize it. And we rationalize it why we had to do it, right? So you have to watch out for your own biases, political biases, but also your history bias and your own belief system outside of that as well. And that is why I do pay attention, right? I pay attention for what the official lie is, or if the official story is, but I don't take it for granted as, yes, that is the truth. I look at it as, that is something that they want me to believe, right? And then out of that, you can do reverse engineer it. Why do they want that? So I listen to that information, but I see it as, why do they want to communicate this to us? What is the action or reaction that they want from us, right? And based on that, I can step back or take part of it. Very, very simple example, right? Let's take a look at, okay, you could say that there's inflation in housing price, right? And there's inflation, or let's say there is that the producers are holding back the products, right? And creating the shortage. Okay, so if they're creating that, that means that the eventually the profit margin of these evil producers has to go up because now they're selling it. And yes, it actually does go up for a short period of time. But then if they cannot do that, eventually they will try to compete against each other and lower the price. So they can do like spike prices, no problem, and take on a huge profit, right? It has happened in history. Okay, absolutely true. It's not like we have it good, right? There are oligarchs. It's true. However, long term, holistically, you can determine if this was the case or if not, based on what is the next step and what is the next step. For instance, if this was nothing to do with inflation in the sense of a monetary inflation, then you will see this price and that's it. Things will have to go back to normal somewhat, right? If not, eventually what will happen is that because of overall inflation and not spot in some areas or some spots of the economy, these bad actors doing something. But if it's an overall monetary inflation that's happening or a whole economic system kind of falling apart, what will happen, and now we get the confirmation, is that these some other areas, such as the products that you buy after food and after the necessities, those companies will have to start reporting actual losses in profits. So for instance, let's say Netflix, right? Nobody has to have a Netflix account, right? So you don't have to have a Netflix account. So you will unsubscribe from that. Okay, maybe now the excuse is, well, Netflix has gone woke and they don't produce good stuff. People don't like it. That's the case. And if you're a fan of Netflix or you buy Netflix stocks and don't care about it, okay, that's it, right? It's a good enough excuse that you can still not giving advice here at all. But you can lie to yourself and say, no, that was one thing and this company is going to the pooper and that's it. However, if you take a step back and you don't care, you don't have an emotional attachment to Netflix one way or the other, right? Then you can see clearly, okay, what is this sector? What is that sector? What's doing? Okay, why is Target reporting profit miss, right? Earnings misses. What's happening there? Who are the types of buyers that are buying in Target? What types of food did they have to step back? Now they cannot afford to purchase in Target and they have to go to Walmart, right? Now Walmart might increase their profit margin. So you have to look at it holistically and see through the lie. And you will have the ability, if you kind of take off your mantle of judgment and you see things as they are without your political glass on, without your emotional glass on, and you just see it as a game of picking what is actually the main cause of the issues. And if you really break it down, it's always almost the same. And it has to do with something with a monetary policy. However, what now the next step would be is to figure it out if this was purposely done or this was dumb enough mistake that they will try to fix. And that's another discussion that we can get into. So thank you very much for your question and talk to you soon.